Compressors are a dynamic effect that can be very useful in a live sound environment. Compressors reduce or compress the dynamic range of a signal. Basically, they reduce the severity of volume changes. Loud parts aren't as loud and quiet parts aren't as quiet. What this means for you is less grabbing the fader to turn the volume up or down in the middle of a live performance. They can also be used to color the sound, but we'll talk about this later. Now, let's talk about the controls. Your threshold is the first control that you'll set. The threshold is probably the most used control on the compressor. It determines when volume reduction begins. So, if you have a high threshold setting, this means that the signal has to get very loud before any volume reduction starts. If you have a low threshold, this means that the signal does not have to get very loud before compression will begin. The next setting is attack. Attack determines how quickly compression will begin after the threshold has been reached. So, if you have a fast attack setting, that means that compression will begin almost immediately after the threshold has been reached. If you have a slow attack setting, this means that there will be a brief pause before compression begins after you've reached your threshold. Release determines how long the compressor continues to compress once the signal has crossed back below the threshold. Ratio is what makes compression happen. The higher the ratio, the greater change in volume, and the lower the ratio, the less change. If you have your ratio set all the way down to 1:1, you will have no change in volume. So what do the different ratios mean? We'll start with 3:1 because that's a pretty common compressor ratio to start with. 3:1 ratio would mean that for every 3 dB over the threshold, the output volume only goes up 1 dB. A 9:1 ratio would mean that for every 9 dB over the threshold, the output volume would only go up 1 dB. Now, a 1:1 ratio would mean no compression. Output gain, sometimes referred to as makeup gain, is used to compensate for lost volume. This is what makes the quiet parts louder. Some compressors have a knee setting. A soft knee would mean that the compression begins gradually as the signal approaches the threshold. A hard knee would mean that compression begins immediately when the signal reaches the threshold.